What happens when a man known for his thunderous laugh, wild-hearted charm, and warrior-like presence steps onto a daytime talk show set? And the energy instantly shifts into something no one saw coming. What happens when Jason Momoa, the towering force behind Aquaman and the beloved protector of the underdog, sits across from Whoopi Goldberg, a legend of television who has never once backed down from speaking her mind, even when the studio lights burn too brightly? What happens when these two forces meet? And the tension sparks so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that the audience begins to realize they've stumbled into a moment that will be replayed, debated, and dissected across the internet for days. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Stage View, tap like, and drop a comment to keep this channel growing. Because you're about to witness one of the most unforgettable confrontations ever seen on The View. The story begins on a morning that felt like any other, until it didn't. The studio was already alive with chatter long before the hosts walked out. There was something about mornings on The View, the clattering of cameras getting into position, the excited hum of the audience, the unmistakable buzz of people gathering to witness something live, something unpredictable. Guests of The View often walked in smiling, waving, a little nervous but hopeful. It was a talk show after all, not an interrogation chamber. But occasionally something shifted. A tone, a tension, a subtle imbalance that no one fully registered until it erupted. Jason Momoa walked into that tension like a man entering a storm. He arrived early, earlier than most celebrity guests. The backstage crew noticed it right away. He wasn't his usual easygoing self. His walk was purposeful, his jaw tight, his eyes sharper than usual. Normally, he would greet everyone with his signature bear hug energy, a boisterous hello that lit up the entire hallway. But today he nodded politely, kept to himself, and focused on something only he seemed to understand. What that was, no one knew just yet. Producers exchanged subtle glances. They could sense it too. Inside the studio, Whoopi Goldberg was reviewing her cue cards. She had been in this business long enough to know that surprises were always lurking, but she looked calm, prepared, steady. She placed her glasses on the table, glanced toward the backstage entrance, and sighed with the weariness of someone who had hosted hundreds of shows and survived the heat of dozens of controversies. "She's ready," a stagehand whispered. "Is he?" another replied. Momoa exhaled deeply and cracked his neck, the tension rippling down his shoulders. He wasn't angry, not yet. But he was holding something inside, something that would soon make the air in the entire studio feel heavier. Then the music hit. The upbeat theme of The View blared through the speakers, the audience erupted in applause, and the hosts strode to their seats with practiced smiles. Joy Behar waved dramatically. Sunny Hostin gave the audience that professional warmth she had perfected. Sarah Haynes gave a cheerful grin. And Whoopi just nodded, ready to begin. "What a morning," she said, settling into her seat as the applause died down. "We've got a packed show today, folks." Joy jumped in with a joke. Sarah added a playful comment. The chemistry between the hosts felt normal, light, familiar, dependable. But then Whoopi turned to the camera with a knowing smile. "And later on, we'll be joined by the one and only Jason Momoa." The audience cheered, almost instinctively. Jason was loved, universally, passionately. His presence alone filled a room with excitement. But back in the corridor, hearing his name called, Jason closed his eyes. The tension that had been simmering inside him tightened even more. He knew what he came here to say. He just wasn't sure how it would land, or how Whoopi would respond. When the time finally came for him to walk out, the energy shifted instantly. "Please welcome Jason Momoa," Whoopi announced. The audience jumped to their feet. Jason emerged, wearing a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He waved, shook hands with the hosts, and took his seat at the table. The cameras zoomed in. His posture was relaxed, but something beneath it was tightly wound. Whoopi leaned forward. "Hey Jason, good to have you." "Good to be here," he said, but his voice carried a weight that caught Joy's attention. They began with the typical questions: his upcoming film, his environmental activism, his recent travels. He answered politely, even cracked a few jokes, but each time Whoopi spoke, Jason's eyes flickered with something unresolved. It wasn't long before she noticed. "You seem a bit intense today," Whoopi said finally, adjusting her glasses and giving him a careful look. Jason exhaled. "I'm just thinking a lot." "About what?" she pressed. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the audience, as if taking their temperature. They were silent now, still waiting, sensing the mood shift. Jason placed both hands on the table. I'm thinking about what was said on this show. About me. About the way you all talked about me a few weeks ago. Joy blinked, confused. Sarah leaned back. Sunny straightened in her seat. But Whoopi didn't flinch. What exactly did we say? She asked, her tone measured. Jason's jaw tightened. You questioned whether I was setting a good example. You implied that my behavior on set was unprofessional. That I was difficult to work with. And you said it without ever talking to me. Without checking if any of it was true. The room went silent, completely silent. Whoopi didn't break eye contact. That's our job, she replied softly. We comment on what's being reported. If something comes out in the news, even if it's wrong, Jason cut in sharply. Sunny looked between them nervously. Joy held her breath. The audience was frozen. Whoopi didn't back down. If a credible source reports it, we discuss it. That's how this works. Jason leaned forward. But you know how this industry is. You know how rumors spread. You know how one headline can twist into a whole narrative. And you know my kids watch this show. My mother watches this show. People believe what you say. There it was, the first crack in his voice. Not anger. Hurt. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Whoopi's tone softened. Jason, if something we said was unfair, then let's talk about it. Right here. Jason inhaled slowly, visibly wrestling with his emotions. For weeks, I've been getting messages from fans asking if I'm spiraling, if I'm losing control, if something is wrong with me. And all of it started here. Joy stepped in, her voice gentle. Jason, you know we adore you. Nobody was trying to tear you down. Jason glanced at her briefly. I know you weren't, but the world doesn't always interpret things the way you meant them. He turned back to Whoopi. I came here today because I didn't want this to turn into one of those Hollywood stories that spirals out of control. I came here because I respect this show. And I respect you. Whoopi lowered her gaze briefly, surprised, perhaps even a little disarmed. Jason continued, his voice steady but intense. When you speak, people listen. When you comment on someone's life or work, it becomes part of the narrative. And I can take criticism. God knows this business teaches you that. But I can't sit back when it starts affecting my family. The audience murmured softly. Sunny spoke next, trying to ease the tension. Maybe the segment came off harsher than we intended. Jason nodded. I know the job isn't easy. And I know opinions are part of the show. But when those opinions start shaping the truth instead of reacting to it, that's when it gets dangerous. Whoopi finally took a deep breath and folded her hands. Jason, she said quietly, if we got something wrong, then I'm glad you're here to correct it. But the way she said it, controlled, careful, made the audience shift again. They sensed a storm was still brewing. Jason wasn't done. Some of the things said weren't just wrong, they were personal, he said. Joy swallowed hard. Sarah looked at Whoopi, silently asking whether they should break for commercial. But Whoopi didn't look away from Jason. What exactly do you want to address? She asked. Jason stared straight into her eyes, his voice dropping into a quieter, more vulnerable register. You said I was acting like a frat boy who aged into a midlife crisis. The audience gasped audibly. Whoopi closed her eyes. She remembered saying it. She remembered the segment. It had been an offhand comment during a discussion about Hollywood masculinity. She hadn't meant it to sting. But hearing it now from him was different. Jason's voice didn't rise, but it vibrated with a tremor of pain. I've worked hard, really hard, to be more than a stereotype. To be a good father, a good partner, a good man. I make mistakes, sure. I joke around. I have fun. But I'm not some caricature of a washed-up frat boy. Whoopi opened her mouth, then closed it. Jason continued, slower now, like the words were costing him something. My daughter asked me why one of her favorite hosts said I was in a crisis. My son asked if I was okay. You have no idea how that felt. The entire studio felt the weight of it. Even Whoopi seemed shaken. But before she could respond, Jason added, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to ask for something you don't often get in this industry. Understanding. Those last words hung in the air, full and heavy. Whoopi finally leaned back, her expression unreadable. The tension was thick enough to slice through. The audience didn't move. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Just silent, suspended disbelief. Watching two powerful figures navigate an emotional minefield live on daytime television. And the storm was far from over. Because what happened next was something no one in that studio, not even the producers, could have predicted. For a moment, no one on set dared to breathe. The cameras continued rolling, their red lights burning like unblinking eyes watching a confrontation that had slipped beyond the boundaries of a normal daytime segment. Producers in the control room exchanged frantic glances, their hands hovering over the switchboard, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the world witness whatever was unfolding at the table. But out on the floor, between Jason Momoa and Whoopi Goldberg, something deeper, something raw, was taking shape. It wasn't anger that made Jason's voice tremble. It was something far more disarming. Vulnerability. And that vulnerability pressed itself into the corners of the studio, pushing the tension into a new, unpredictable territory. Whoopi lifted her chin, as if steadying herself. She had spent decades interviewing political giants, controversial figures, and celebrities riding waves of triumph or disaster. She had faced backlash, fought through accusations, and stood her ground through storms that would flatten most people. But this felt different. "Jason," she began, her voice low, "I'll be honest. I don't remember the context of that conversation. But if it hurt you." "It did," he said, cutting gently across her words. The audience let out a soft gasp, not because he interrupted her, but because he said it so plainly, so honestly, and because truth, when spoken without armor, has a way of striking harder than any insult ever could. Sunny, seated beside Whoopi, leaned forward. "Maybe we should take a moment," she suggested quietly, offering a lifeline that no one took. Jason shook his head. "No, I think we need to talk about it while it's still honest." Whoopi's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. She was trying to measure the moment, trying to understand how far she could bend without breaking. "You came here," she said carefully, "because something we said affected your family. I can respect that. But you have to understand, our job isn't to protect feelings. It's to have conversations." Jason nodded slowly. "I agree, but I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to see the weight your words carry." Joy finally spoke, clearing her throat. This is heavy for morning TV." The attempt at humor fell flat, and she immediately winced. Jason didn't react to the joke. He just continued watching Whoopi with an expression that was equal parts vulnerable and resolute. "You're someone I admire," he said to her softly. "That's why it hit harder." The words stunned the room. Whoopi blinked, caught off guard. "You admire me?" Jason nodded. "You've always been someone who speaks truth to power. Someone who doesn't hold back. I've watched you since I was a kid. You don't know what it means to have someone you respect question your character." Whoopi swallowed, and suddenly she wasn't Whoopi Goldberg, the iconic host, anymore. She was simply a human being, caught in a moment where intention collided painfully with impact. Joy shifted uncomfortably in her chair, biting her lip. Sarah looked down at her hands. Sunny watched with a mix of empathy and caution. Jason leaned in, his voice steady. "I didn't come here to demand an apology. I came here to look you in the eye and tell you that your words mattered. They changed something, and I needed you to hear my side." The audience sat in a tension so thick it felt like humidity. Whoopi took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. "Well," she murmured, "you're here. So tell me." Jason's chest rose and fell slowly, as if he were pushing through memories he didn't want to relive. "I've been going through a lot," he said finally. "More than any headline could ever explain. It's been personal, private, and I've tried to handle it without the world watching. But when you said what you said, it felt like the world suddenly had a front row seat to a part of my life I wasn't ready to share." His voice cracked, barely noticeable, but enough for the audience to feel the rupture. Whoopi's expression shifted, faintly but undeniably. A flicker of regret. A crack in her armor. "Jason," she said slowly, "everyone at this table has had moments where something we said was taken differently than we intended. But if I said something that touched a nerve I didn't know was exposed, that changes things." Jason looked up, surprised at the softness in her tone. "But," she added, "you have to understand something else. We're not always told the whole truth. We only react to what's out there." Jason nodded, but his eyes were unwavering. "And I'm here to tell you the truth now." A murmur swept through the audience. Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jason, what are you going through?" It was the first time the question had been spoken aloud. Jason hesitated. The cameras leaned in, capturing every micro-expression, every breath. He looked out at the audience, then back at the hosts. If he said it, the entire world would hear it. If he didn't, they would fill the silence with speculation. Slowly, he exhaled. "I've been dealing with the end of something that meant a lot to me," he said finally, not using the word relationship, but implying it with the heaviness of his voice. And it's been hard. Harder than anyone knows. A ripple of sympathy passed through the audience. Things fall apart, he continued quietly. Families shift. People change. And sometimes you lose yourself trying to hold it all together. He paused, his eyes glistening, not with tears, but with the effort of holding them back. And the day you said I was spiraling was the day I woke up wondering if maybe you were right. And that scared me. The silence that followed was unlike anything the show had ever seen. Whoopi's face softened more than anyone expected. She wasn't a woman easily moved, but this reached her. Jason, she said, her voice cracking just slightly. I didn't know. Jason nodded. Because I didn't tell anyone. She leaned back, folding her arms. Not defensively, but protectively, almost as if bracing herself against the gravity of his honesty. I should have been more careful, she admitted quietly. Joy's mouth fell open. Sarah froze. Sunny inhaled sharply. Whoopi Goldberg almost never said she should have been more careful. Jason looked at her, surprised. You're not the villain here. No, Whoopi replied. But that doesn't mean I can't do better. The audience erupted into applause, but Whoopi lifted her hand quickly, silencing them. No, she said firmly. Let him finish. Jason smiled faintly. Just enough to break the tension, but not enough to erase it. I didn't come here to put you on trial, he said. I came here because I didn't want to become a tabloid version of myself. And because I wanted you to see me, not the character, not the media headline. Me. Whoopi stared at him, searching his face. Well, she murmured, I see you. And for the first time since he'd arrived on set, Jason's shoulders relaxed. Just slightly, but undeniably. But the moment wasn't over. Because the audience, sensing the emotional intensity leveling off, began to shift restlessly. A few murmured softly. A few clapped again. And somewhere in the third row, someone whispered too loudly. So is she going to apologize or not? The sound carried through the studio like a pebble dropped into a silent lake. Whoopi heard it. Jason heard it. Everyone heard it. Jason glanced at Whoopi, as if silently telling her she didn't know him that. Not publicly, not performatively. But Whoopi's eyes hardened, not in anger, but in resolve. Look, she said, turning toward Jason with the full weight of her presence. I'm not someone who apologizes because a camera is rolling. I don't say things unless I mean them. Jason nodded, bracing himself. Whoopi inhaled deeply. And I'm not apologizing because you confronted me. I'm apologizing because you're right. The words I used were careless. And you didn't deserve that. The studio exploded in gasps, applause, emotional murmurs. Jason blinked, stunned, not expecting the moment to land with such gravity. But Whoopi wasn't finished. You came here to speak your truth. And whether people like it or not, that takes guts. So yes, Jason, I'm sorry. The applause grew louder, but Jason raised a hand to quiet it, mirroring Whoopi's earlier gesture. He leaned forward, his voice softer now. Thank you. Another beat of silence passed, warm, not tense. It seemed like the moment had resolved. But then Sunny leaned in, looking at Jason with an expression the audience couldn't quite read. There's something else, she said quietly, that we haven't discussed. Jason turned to her. What is it? Sunny hesitated, and the energy in the room shifted again, sharper this time. What happens, she asked slowly, when the confrontation isn't just about what was said, but what wasn't? Jason stared at her, unsure where she was heading. Whoopi turned toward Sunny, her expression tightening again. Joy whispered, "Oh boy," and Sarah muttered under her breath, "Not again." Sunny took a breath, bracing herself, because what she was about to say would drag everything into a storm far bigger than anyone expected. Sunny's words hovered in the air like a spark searching for something dry enough to ignite. And in that silent, suspended moment, the entire studio seemed to lean toward her, watching, waiting, bracing. Even the cameras seemed to tighten their focus, as if sensing that what she was about to say could shift the entire trajectory of the conversation. Jason sat still, confusion clouding his eyes. Whoopi glanced sharply toward Sunny, her expression taut. Joy pressed a hand to her chest and muttered something incomprehensible under her breath. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her nerves practically visible in the way her fingers drummed softly on the table. Sunny inhaled slowly, choosing her next words with surgical precision. "There's something that wasn't talked about," she said. "Something that made those earlier comments about you land harder than they should have." Jason cocked his head, still uncertain. "What do you mean?" Sunny looked away briefly, as if gathering strength before looking him in the eyes. You weren't just dealing with stress from the breakup, she said gently. You were dealing with betrayal. Public betrayal. The audience collectively inhaled, sharp, loud, immediate. Jason's breath caught in his throat. Whoopi's eyes widened, and she whispered sharply, Sonny, don't. Joy stared at her wide-eyed. Sarah mouthed, Oh no. But Sonny pushed forward. No, she said firmly, her voice trembling only slightly. This part matters. Because it's the part that made everything else you were going through feel 100 times heavier. Jason blinked, jaw tightening, his emotions flickering across his face like shadows. Quietly, he said, You don't know the whole story. Sonny nodded. I know enough to know that the rumors weren't just rumors. Whoopi looked at Sonny with disbelief. This isn't the place. Jason raised a hand toward Whoopi, not as a rebuke, but as a plea. No, let her finish, he said softly. Sonny swallowed and continued. When news broke that someone close to you, someone you trusted, was photographed, let's just say, in a situation that blindsided you, the media chewed you up. They painted you like a jealous ex. Like you were spiraling because you couldn't handle seeing her move on. The audience murmured, voices rising and falling in a wave of sympathy, shock, curiosity. Jason clenched his fists under the table. His breath deepened, and for a moment he didn't say a word. Whoopi leaned in carefully. Jason, you don't have to respond to that. Jason shook his head slowly. I know, but then he did something no one expected. He looked directly at Sonny. You're right, he said quietly. That was the part no one knew. The part one didn't want anyone to know. His voice shook, not with anger, but with the exhaustion of someone who'd spent too long pretending he was fine. He took a moment, then continued. I didn't lose my mind. I didn't spiral. I got hurt. Really hurt. The audience softened, some nodding, some placing hands over their mouths. Jason exhaled. When that picture came out, I found out the same way everyone else did. On social media. On my phone. A friend sent it to me with a question mark. He paused, pressing his lips together as emotion tightened his throat. I hadn't even processed the breakup yet. We were still talking, still figuring things out, or so I thought. And suddenly the world decided to tell me I'd been replaced. The murmurs grew heavier, more empathetic. Jason's voice dropped lower, deeper. That's why your comment hit me so hard, Whoopi. It wasn't just a joke about a midlife crisis. It was thrown on top of something I was barely surviving. Whoopi stared at him, jaw slightly trembling, though her expression remained composed. But she didn't speak. Not yet. Jason continued. At first, I tried to ignore it. Pretend it didn't matter. But it mattered. Because everything I had built for years, my family, my image, my career, it suddenly felt like it was slipping out of my hands. He rubbed his thumb against his palm, grounding himself. And the idea that I was becoming some unstable cliché? That narrative spreads fast. Faster than the truth ever could. Sonny nodded solemnly. That's why I brought it up. Because the truth should be part of this conversation. Jason turned to her, gratitude flickering in his eyes. But then Whoopi leaned forward, her expression tightening again. Not in defensiveness, but in something deeper. Something protective. Jason, she said softly, what happened to you? That wasn't fair. Not any of it. And I'm sorry you felt alone in that. Jason looked at her, surprised by the sincere warmth in her tone. But, she added, you have to understand we didn't know. None of us knew. What was happening behind the scenes was private. So all we had to go on were the headlines. Jason nodded. I know that. I don't blame you for not knowing. I just needed you to know now. Whoopi exhaled slowly. I hear you. Sarah finally joined in, her voice gentler than usual. Jason, I think everyone at this table wants to make something clear. You don't owe anyone an explanation. Not the media. Not the fans. Not even us. What you went through is yours. Jason nodded slowly, taking in her words. But Sonny wasn't done yet. She leaned in again, her eyes searching his. There's something else, she said softly. Something that worried me more than the headlines. The tension snapped back instantly, sharper now, almost electric. Jason blinked. What? Sonny hesitated, glancing at the other hosts as if asking for permission. None of them gave it. But she went on anyway. When all of this started happening, she said, choosing her words with care, there were reports, not from tabloids, but from people who know you, who said you were isolating, pulling away, shutting down. Jason's shoulders tensed. And I worried, Sonny continued quietly, that the world was laughing while you were drowning. Jason inhaled sharply, visibly shaken by the honesty of the statement. Whoopi's voice cracked. Sonny. But Sonny didn't back down. You're a strong man, Jason. Everyone sees that. But strength doesn't mean you don't break. So if the comments we made added weight when you were already sinking, then that's something I want to acknowledge too. Silence fell over the studio like a heavy curtain. Jason closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were glassy, not with tears, but with something deeper, something human and unguarded. You're right, he said quietly. I was drowning. The audience gasped, softly, collectively, as if the confession pulled air from their lungs too. Jason continued. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to answer messages. I didn't want to smile for cameras or pretend I was the same guy everyone expects me to be. His voice tightened. I felt like I was falling apart in slow motion, and everyone was watching it like entertainment. Even Joy, usually quick with a joke to break tension, had tears forming in her eyes. Sarah's face crumpled with sympathy. Whoopi folded her hands. Her tough exterior softened to something raw and maternal. Sonny looked at Jason with eyes full of both pain and understanding. Jason leaned back, looking up at the ceiling as if trying to steady himself. And that's why I came here, he said finally. Because I didn't want the version of me out there to be the one created by headlines or jokes or assumptions. I wanted to show up. As myself. Even if it means being messy or emotional or vulnerable. Whoopi nodded slowly, her voice quiet but steady. That takes courage. Jason looked at her, and for the first time since he walked onto the set, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. But then, just as the atmosphere began to settle, just as it seemed like healing was possible, the tension snapped back again. Because someone from the audience suddenly shouted, So who betrayed you, Jason? The room erupted in gasps. Jason froze. Whoopi slammed a hand on the table. Hey, that is not. But Jason lifted his hand, stopping her. He turned slowly toward the direction of the voice. The studio fell silent again, this time with a burning intensity. Jason's expression shifted, somber, resolute, wounded but no longer hiding. I'm not naming names, he said softly. This isn't about them. This is about me. The audience murmured, impressed by his restraint. But then he added, with a depth that sent a shiver through the entire room. And this is about what happens when the world forgets that the people they watch, the people they joke about, are still human. Whoopi swallowed, visibly moved. Sonny exhaled slowly. Joy wiped her eyes. Sarah nodded with trembling empathy. Jason's voice dropped to a near whisper. That's all I want people to remember. But the storm was not done. Because what happened next, something unplanned, something unfiltered, would take this emotional confrontation and push it into a moment the internet would replay for months. The tension in the studio crackled so intensely it felt like the lights above them were buzzing louder, the air vibrating with the collective heartbeat of every person present. Jason's last words hung in the space between him and the audience, fragile, honest, impossible to ignore. And then, in the middle of that raw silence, something unexpected happened. Whoopi Goldberg, who had been holding herself with measured composure through the entire confrontation, suddenly leaned back in her chair and pressed both hands over her face. The audience gasped. Even Jason blinked in shock. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't performative. It was something far more startling. It was human. A deep exhale slipped from behind her hands, and for the first time that morning, Whoopi looked less like the television icon everyone knew and more like a person who realized, perhaps too late, that her words had carried farther than she ever intended. When she lowered her hands, her eyes glistened. Jason, she said, barely above a whisper, you didn't deserve any of that. Not from me. Not from anyone. Jason's breath caught, but he said nothing. He simply listened. Whoopi continued, her voice trembling. You come onto this show, you sit at this table, and you open your heart in a way most people in Hollywood would never dare. And to know that something I said, something careless, added to the pain you were already carrying. She shook her head slowly. That stays with me. Joy wiped her cheek with her sleeve. Sonny looked away for a moment, trying to compose herself. Sarah pressed her lips together, swallowing hard. Jason leaned forward slightly, placing his hand on the table, grounding himself. Whoopi, he said softly, I didn't come here to make you feel bad. I know, she replied, and I'm not asking you to relive that moment or carry it around. I know, she said again, but this time her voice cracked. He took a breath, the weight of his emotions returning but steadier now. I just wanted to have this conversation face to face. Human to human. Not actor to host. Not celebrity to critic. Just two people trying to understand each other. The audience murmured softly, touched by the sincerity in his tone. Sonny leaned in. That's the part that makes this moment matter. Most people clash on social media or talk through PR statements. But you showed up. You sat down. You talked it out. And that takes real courage. Jason gave her a grateful nod. But then something shifted again. An unexpected shift. A ripple of movement, quiet but unmistakable, moved through the audience as someone stood from the back row. A producer instinctively raised their hand to block the view. But the person didn't move closer. They just spoke, loudly enough to be heard. You're stronger than you think, Jason. Jason turned toward the voice, startled. The audience member, a middle-aged woman with tears in her eyes, continued. People forget you're human because you play heroes. But today you showed more strength than any superhero could. The audience erupted into applause, slow at first, then swelling into a thunderous wave of sound that rolled through the studio like a tide. Jason looked down, overwhelmed. Whoopi reached out, tentatively at first, then placed her hand over his. A gesture of unity, of understanding, of something bigger than apology or conflict. Jason met her eyes, and in that silent exchange, something settled between them. A truce, a recognition, an unexpected bond forged in vulnerability and truth. Joy sniffled loudly. Oh, for God's sake, she muttered, grabbing a tissue. This is supposed to be the view, not this is us. The audience laughed through their tears. Even Jason cracked a smile. Whoopi chuckled softly. Leave it to Joy. Switching gears just slightly, Sonny turned toward Jason again. There's one thing we haven't addressed yet. Jason raised an eyebrow. There's more. Sonny nodded. The aftermath. The studio quieted again. You said you felt like you were drowning, she continued. But you didn't stay there. You came out on the other side. Stronger. Clearer. And you're still here. That matters. Jason nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of her words. And, Sonny added, I think people need to hear what pulled you out. Jason exhaled. Honestly, my kids. I had a moment where I realized I can't disappear on them. I can't fall apart in front of them. They deserve the best version of me, even when I don't feel like I have anything left. The audience nodded, several wiping tears. That's what saved me, he said. That and moments like this. Conversations like this. Being real instead of hiding. Whoopi looked at him with quiet admiration. I appreciate you saying that, she said. And I appreciate you showing up today, not as Aquaman, not as the guy with the big laugh, but as Jason. The real Jason. Jason smiled, genuine and warm. Thanks, Whoopi. Joy clapped her hands dramatically. Well, I think this is the part where we all hug. The audience laughed, easing the tension. Jason chuckled. I'm good with that. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. My knees aren't, but sure. Everyone laughed again. Jason stood, and one by one, the hosts rose too. The hug wasn't dramatic or showy. It was simple, human, honest. Jason embraced Joy first, then Sarah, then Sonny. And then finally, hesitantly, carefully, he embraced Whoopi. It wasn't long. It wasn't overdone. But it meant everything. When they all returned to their seats, the applause grew louder, more sustained, more emotional than anything the view had seen in months. But the moment wasn't over. Not yet. Sarah leaned forward and looked into the camera, her voice soft but steady. This conversation, this is what television is supposed to be. Honest, real, vulnerable. Sonny added, and it's a reminder that the people we talk about are human beings with real lives. Joy nodded. And sometimes we screw up, but we can fix it. Whoopi looked into the camera, her expression solemn and sincere. And sometimes, she said, a conversation can change everything. Jason took a deep breath and turned to the camera as well. This wasn't easy, he said, but I'm glad it happened. And I hope it reminds people out there, no matter what you're going through, don't let the world decide your story for you. Speak your truth, even when it's hard. The applause rose once again. And then, as the studio quieted, Jason looked directly into the camera, into the eyes of the millions who would soon watch this moment online, replaying it again and again. And be good to each other, he said softly. You never know what someone's carrying. A hush fell, deep and powerful. Then the camera faded to commercial, and the moment became legend. But the aftermath, the real aftermath, had only just begun. Within hours, social media exploded. Clips from the show spread like wildfire, stitched onto TikToks, reposted on Instagram, dissected on Twitter. Jason's vulnerability became a trending topic. The Views segment hit millions of views before the episode had even finished airing in other time zones. Fans praised his honesty. Critics applauded the rawness of the moment. Commentators called it one of the most emotional daytime confrontations in recent memory. And as the night rolled in, Jason posted a simple message online. "I'm okay. Just human." The post shattered records for engagement. But the conversation, the healing, the impact, it all began with one moment on live television and one man choosing to speak his truth. And to the viewers watching from home, the story wasn't just drama. It was a reminder of what it means to be real. A reminder of what it means to be human. And if you're watching this right now, that message is also for you. Because now it's your turn. Tell us, what did you think of Jason's confrontation with Whoopi? Was he right to call it out? Was the view fair? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in this discussion. And if you want more cinematic, explosive, emotional breakdowns of Hollywood's most shocking moments, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, hit like, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story with twists, tension, and truth. This is Stage View, and more unbelievable stories are just getting started.